Um, I'm not sure who in my committee is with us. I know Senator Balance still working on an issue that's taken her away from committee this morning. I see Senator Rahm. Senator, we need one more for a quorum. Senator Clarkson or Brock, are you with us yet? I guess not. So we'll start with Brian when we have a quorum. Okay, we have a quorum. And then I think we'll go on to Michael. I always have trouble, Michael, with your pronunciation of your last name, but you've been very patient. But Brian, if you can start us off, and I know you have a busy schedule, so if you can, we're running out of runway here, so if you can be relatively brief, that would be great. Tell us Middlebury's situation.
Thank you, Senator. I am the chair of the Middlebury Select Board and have been for a number of years now. And Middlebury is very interested in jumpstarting a substantial redevelopment project in the middle of what is our designated downtown. We just completed a master plan for our downtown space. There's one large substantial area that is open for development. It's been utilized for many years as a parking area because we don't have a parking structure and there's not that much on-street parking in the downtown area. We've looked at this project, started looking very seriously at it a half a dozen years ago. This project could provide housing, office space, parking, river access, and even improve the traffic flow in our downtown core. We have a major structure in our downtown on the main street that has been vacant for a couple of years. It's the old Ben Franklin building. It needs a lot of infrastructure work inside the building to be usable. This project envisions that it could incorporate the redevelopment of that space in our downtown as well. We feel it would also help Middlebury overcome the devastating double whammy of the rail bridge project that we've been going through for the last 3 years and the COVID pandemic and the resulting reduction of business in our downtown. By doing that, we think we can grow the downtown and get to a critical mass of not just residency, but frequent users of the downtown space. The utilization of downtown space seems to be changing. There's fewer storefronts and more coffee shops and restaurants and activity-based businesses. We looked at the TIF program as it exists today. We had a Economic Health Committee look at it. Some of the issues, the biggest issue for us as a small town is the administrative burden. And it seems significant with the existing program. The way this is written, it seems to fit our needs as a small town a lot better. The needs are really for some sort of parking structure, as well as some other infrastructure work that came about in envisioning what the future of our downtown is going to be in our master plan. When we look at the cost of that, $20,000 to $22,000 per space in a parking structure, it's you're talking up in the $4 or $5 million to be something that actually opens up space for development while at the same time providing sufficient parking. We have really struggled with bonding for something that size in the past, and when we redid our town offices, it really took the college's support. A couple factors: we still Even though people envision Middlebury as one of the wealthier towns, maybe it's not necessarily that way when you really look at the tax rolls, because we have such a high percentage of nonprofits as well as the college property that are not tax paying properties within our town center. As well, we're on the list of the subsidized meals. We're over the 50% mark. And so there's still a significant portion of people that if we really had excessively high bonding expenses and rolled that into the taxes, it would be a real devastation to some of those families. So this tool looks like a really positive way to jumpstart some of the redevelopment that's envisioned and ensures the longevity of our downtown, and it doesn't die off like so many other downtowns seem to be doing.
Brian, have you, how far along in the analysis, or did you ever come close to consideration of a straight bond in town, or it's just off the table for you folks?
We looked at it and it was off the table. It was just, it doesn't fit into our budget. It's just not within our capacity to do that. And I know your current bill is drafted with a $1.5 million. We really need something higher than that. We can bond in that range, but we need to raise the floor. If I think at least for Middlebury to be able to utilize this program, it needs to be something higher that meets what our grand vision of the growth of our downtown would look like.
Okay. I appreciate that. I assume you've been in, if you haven't been, but I assume you probably have had some communication with the state about this bill or about TIF districts, and I encourage you to share all your specifics with them, so if we move forward, that they can use your municipality as an example as well.
Absolutely would. And I know there's a tension between this and the appearance of the education fund. As a local business who I invest in properties throughout the state. We have businesses in 4 communities around the state. And the cost of construction is so significant that we're not getting the investment. I think this opens up an opportunity, and it's really a long-term view. And I love that you're looking at this, and I hope this is something that we can move forward.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry we're so pressed for time right now. It
Michael,
seems to be, yes. Sorry,
may
Senator.
I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
So thank you very much, Brian. I'm just curious what the cap, if 1.5 is too low, what would you think would be an appropriate cap for both village centers and downtowns the size of Middlebury's? Because you and Westford are fairly different sized communities. You have a very robust downtown already. What scale are you thinking would be appropriate?
Understand that because the town will be participating, and there'll be grant funding on a lot of these projects, and other will be seeking other means of funding, not just through this particular TIF. So I do believe that if you could be in that $4 million, it wouldn't necessarily use it all, but it opens it up the options, and it really allows us to think big. We want to do something that, like we're doing a 100-year project in the downtown of Middlebury. That's a state-generated project. The town ought to be able to think big as well, and establish projects that set the town up for multi-generational success, as opposed to consistently patching things together.
That's a nice way of looking at it. Multi-generational success. Here.
Think bold. Okay.
Yeah, that's make no little plans. That's the motto. Daniel Burnham's motto is Senate Economic Development's motto.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. We're going to move on to Michael Gahn. Hi, Michael. Are you with us?
Hey there, how are you?
How am I pronouncing your last name? I always
Yeah,
get-
you nailed it. That was perfect. It's just
Perfect.
Vaughn with a G or Gone, however you choose to.
Gahn, yeah.
Thank
Is
you.
that what's the derivation? I mean, what's the heritage of that name? Is it French?
It's Irish.
Irish.
Yeah, so I think Gagan, but then switched to Gone when it made the jump.
I think what I was interested in hearing from you on is people talk about, you heard Graham Campbell say, is this worth it? It's complicated. What are the other ways towns can access money? You probably have your finger on every possibility out there in the state of Vermont. And specifically what is your role in facilitating some of those financing mechanisms?
Sure. So I think that's kind of hits the nail on the head, is that we're involved with the financing mechanisms. So, our pooled loan program through the bond bank that leverages bonds that we issue then to make loans to local communities. And then we're the financial administrator of the municipality or the municipal portion of the state revolving loan funds. And then, between those two programs, we're trying to get a handle on kind of what capture rate that is for long-term infrastructure, but it's very high. And then if you add in USDA, then you essentially have the entire gamut of financing sources. But at the end of the day, those are financing sources. So they leverage some sort of form of repayment, whether it be user fees, property tax revenues, and then allow those projects to occur based upon that source of repayment. That source of repayment is the funding portion of it. And I think it's, from what I've heard, it's really the funding portion of it that becomes the tricky part. Availability of capital for infrastructure is, I'd say, less the issue unless we're talking about school facilities, but that's an entirely different question and different set of considerations. But at least at the infrastructure level, I don't really think it's a financing question. It's really a funding question. And what we observe is that in a lot of particularly village settings, primarily as a result of some sort of mandate on environmental issues, you see 10, 15, 20% rate increases on user fee basis as they implement a project. And that's even taking into consideration what are various very generous terms in the SRF program. So there really is, an infrastructure, there really is, you have large fixed assets and a small user base, and there's only really one way to make that happen. And that's through rate increases or higher taxes. And that's the problem about Vermont. You don't have the same level of scale that you have in a major urban area.
And you're restricted. You can't, you say you give favorable rates, but you can't give like no interest loans out, can you?
No, that's not part of our current structure. We are effectively market-based, so whatever cost of capital we have, we're passing on to our borrowers with very little modification. There's no, we fund ourselves outside of our loan program, so they're getting a market rate and they're getting the benefit of the support of the state in our credit structure. And what's interesting right now is that rates are so darn low, is that you're getting kind of a natural subsidy as compared to where we were a couple of years ago. Say a $1 million borrowing for 20 years, a 1% change in rates, uniform shift gives you about $100,000 of savings, present value savings, or additional debt capacity, however you choose to look at it. So that's where we are now compared to where we were last year. So infrastructure generally is more affordable.
So I'm not going to keep you long, but we're venturing into your world here a little bit. Do you have a professional opinion of TIFs and small scale TIFs?
Not really. I think I have an economic development background. I've seen them in different settings. I think they're interesting tools in how they can help set the agenda and mobilize a community as a sort of carrot. But I think the more general point we would make, from the bond bank is that we do see a need for true, in economic development, you sort of talk about equity in different ways. One is equity is equal access, is making sure that folks have the same level of investment in all parts of a community. But the other aspect of equity is financial equity, and we do see a need for that. As I mentioned, these rate increases that we see in certain places are very dramatic, and so true equity, be it grant, be it TIF, be it however it comes, we think could be beneficial.
I'm not sure I followed that. What specifically do you mean by financial equity? Financial equity among the towns? Or
Equity in the sense of patient capital, capital that doesn't necessarily need to be repaid. So, in a corporate setting, that would be your last money to get repaid. But in a municipal setting, that's really your grants, things of that nature.
when you say financial equity, it should be available to all towns on a equal or an equitable basis? Is that what you're?
Well, I
saying?
think there's two ways to look at that. That's one part of equity of distribution. The other part of equity is that it lives with the project forever, and therefore reduces the amount that needs to be repaid on any associated debt. And I think that's what TIF does, because you're bringing in other sources of repayment that otherwise wouldn't be possible. And so, you're effectively putting in dollars into that project that that are new to that community.
Okay. Anybody have any questions for Michael? Thanks for bearing with us. Good. Thank you very much. I think we're going to move on to Ken. Are you part of this in terms of working with Megan, or separate from?
No, this is in terms of working with Megan, and the very specific piece that I've worked on with regular TIFs, and we'll weigh in here, is the but-for argument. So if I'll take a couple minutes now if you want, or.
Absolutely. Go ahead. Go for it.
Yeah. So I'm Ken Jones. I do economic research at the Agency of Commerce, which, just so you know, includes VEPSI, includes the economic development world, but also includes housing and community development. And so with that,
change your screen a little bit. Your
head. We can't see.
There you go.
You don't want my head. No. Anyway.
Oh,
okay.
We want your head.
Okay.
Your head is your most valuable part here, Ken Jones.
Oh dear. So say that the issue I want to address is but-for. I was involved in the analysis for the approval of the Bennington and Montpelier TIF. And in doing that, I also did a retrospective in terms of St. Albans as one of the more recently, before my time, approved TIFs. And what I do is I look at the development, the grand list development within the designated downtowns or the TIF areas 10 years prior to the TIF. In the case of St. Albans, 10 years prior to the TIF. In case of Bennington, Montpelier, 10 years prior to the application. And there is essentially no development. And so that is the basis in which we do that sort of TIF analysis about but-for, because I know that others would say, well, but in general, grand lists increase. But in general, what's happening is greenfield development. If we look through, and I do want to separate out the Chittenden County area. I do, Williston, Burlington, South Burlington, they are different and raise a whole different set of questions about whether encouraging growth in our economic engine is important. But I want to set that aside because this is looking outside of those urban areas. And again, looking at the downtowns, the Montpelier, Bennington, and St. Albans specifically, but I'm sure if we look in many, many, many others and you look at historically, that is not where real estate development is taking place. And so when the but for is thrown out in terms of a policy issue, in general, there is some pretty significant evidence to say that without some further encouragement, the investments in our small downtowns will not take place because it hasn't taken place. And there's no obvious tide saying that, oh yeah, our downtowns are going to be bursting at the seams with new investments. I'm not seeing any evidence of that. Which also gets then to, I say, the other but for, which is, well, but if we don't do these small TIFs, these place-based programs, can't we use another tool? But I think that same observation about the inability of small communities to invest in their infrastructure over the last many, many years is evidence that those other tools haven't been adequate. And I'm pretty sure that every place that you'll see one of these mini TIFs, they will be using other tools. They will be using the other monies that are available for downtown development. So again, that's kind of my emphasis is on but for, and I think, while but for is always a challenging question, I hope that you folks can have some confidence that but for this program, you're not going to see much improvement in our small downtowns. And you know, there's a long list. One of my earlier lives was in small community wastewater, and Vermont has a long list of communities that are looking for small wastewater solutions and have been for years. So anyway, that's my piece. Take any questions.
Well, I don't want to necessarily put you on the spot, but especially in your role at ACCD and your peers around you right now, but isn't one alternative to take 10% of this $200 million that we have in one-time money and sprinkle it around to these project-based proposals?
Yeah, again, I can't say that I'm going to reflect the administration position on this, but just as sort of just an economic piece, the extent to which we can leverage investment, great. But the one-time expenditure, you'd say 10%, $20 million, that'll do some good, no question. But I think what we're looking at is a bigger pot that is the leveraged amount, which is what any of these financing schemes does, is it allows us to pay back over a longer term period. I'll say $100 million, $200 million. So that's, if there's a way to use 20 million to allow leverage so that it can be used for interest buy down, for example, or negative interest, that's one thing. But in terms of a $20 million single infusion, not so sure that gets you there.
Well, I love leverage. It's my middle name, but
We know.
I guess at least what came out of finance, I think we were talking about very few projects with $1.5 million. Maybe I'm missing that, but isn't that $1.5 million per project? Isn't that effectively the bonding amount and maybe it's not the full capital cost of the project, but if you multiply that by 10, that's only $15 million worth of projects.
Right. Right. I think the 1.5 million is part of a financial stack. I don't think there are going to be many of these that'll just go for a single $1.5 million project.
Well, so could the $20 million for that matter.
What's that?
Well, so could the $20 million for that
That's
matter.
right.
be part of a
That's right.
stack.
Could be part of a stack. Yep. It could be. I agree. I think that tapping the bonding authority gives you greater dollars.
I mean, I like creative financing. I've been a fan of TIFs, but it's sort of like, at least at the level we were at, it's sort of very complicated as opposed to straight grants to communities. But anyhow, thank you for that. We have about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Megan. And and to tell us whatever she wants to tell us, but hopefully maybe touch upon some of the critiques you've heard so far. I think what I'm going to ask the committee to do is to spend the weekend going through, we have a volume of material that people have prepared for us. And we'll try and identify what other witnesses we want to have, and then we'll start having some committee discussion next week. So however you'd like to use your time, Megan, but I'd prefer you try and address some of the concerns you've heard from other witnesses.
Absolutely. Megan Sullivan, Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for having me and for your committee. We appreciate the time that this proposal is getting and do think it is important and a priority, and shouldn't be lost in the conversation. A few things, sort of the bigger picture items of the ability of equity across Vermont to have access to this type of financing tool. We've seen what it can do in our regional hubs. We have made a priority as a state to have smart growth in our village centers and our downtowns. We know this is something that communities want, and having the ability to access this tool, even if it is in a smaller way, provides a level of equity to say that their priorities, their towns are important to us as well. I think looking at some of what's come up, the point of that this is simplified when we're talking about 10 years worth of projects, 10 years worth of development that's going to come about, then you do have people spending tens of thousands of dollars with a consultant to pull together an application. If you're talking about 300 parcels and all of the data that needs to go into that 300 parcels, as well as the planning that goes into the development that will happen on those 300 parcels, that is very complex. The goal of this proposal to simplify it for small towns is that we're not looking at 300 parcels. We're looking at a limited number of parcels with a nexus to the project that's taking place in our designated areas or in industrial parks as they've been defined in statute. And one project. So that one project and that one incurrence of debt, those are the pieces that really go into place to how we have simplified what the process is in order to be successful in rolling this program out. I think a comment that was made in terms of the nanny state, is an important one. Years ago in 2017, before my time with the council, there were 6 additional districts that were approved, and the thought that there would be hundreds of applications in order to take these to take these 6 district placements. And that's not been the case. Towns are aware of risks. They're risk adverse. They understand how challenging downtown development is. And that program has worked very well for the communities that it can serve, but it's complicated, and towns are not making these choices in a way that is irresponsible. And I think the expectation with this program is that towns are still going to be looking at what are all of the pieces that they need to be successful, and they're not going to be putting the townspeople at risk without having a clear understanding of, is there a private development that could come about because of this? And who are those developers? What are they looking for? What are the agreements? What's going to come into place? And what kind of grand list growth are we going to see? I think, one thing to point out in terms of the cap is we are not in favor of a cap on this. We look at those guardrails that are in place by having a much smaller number of parcels, that this is gap financing, and that there's a viability check that is done to say what is the amount of debt that's going to be taken out, what is the increment expected, and does it show viability? with those guardrails in place, we don't think there needs to be a cap. There is not a cap in the TIF district program. Viability is looked at for each of those, and those range from that viability of, is the community show that they can take out $6 million worth of debt, and in those cases, those communities are approved for $6 million. If it's showing that they can take out $50 million of debt, and they show viability for that, then that's what they've been approved for. So we have districts that range greatly in size because of that check on viability. What is the private development that is expected? And so I think, that's one point. Another point is that towns like Westford, that they are putting skin in the game. They're saying we can put some of this on our ratepayers. But if we can take a portion of that and use TIF, then we don't have to put all of it on our ratepayers to the point that they can't afford it. So it's not just a matter of 1.5 million being the total. In that the document that I provided last time, we showed that it is a capital stack where it's the ratepayer increase, state revolving loan fund, Northern Border Regional Commission funds, and this is really how do we close the gap for those rural communities in order to have that transformational 100-year success.
Would you be open to mandating some sort of stacking before people could participate in a mini TIF?
To show, yeah, I mean, we sent a little, I know I provided some of the language from the TIF district program where we require to show what other sources of funding are you pulling together for this? Because that is an important piece. We want to see that you've gone everywhere and you've looked under all the rocks to figure out how can we pay for this? And that this is really the last piece to help get these projects over the finish line. Again, as the state priority to have smart growth in our village centers and our downtowns, to say we want a general store in our downtown rather than a Dollar General in a greenfield outside of town. That this is a priority for the state and for the town.
Right. So.
That's certainly that's certainly something we already put in our TIF district application. What are the other sources of funding that are coming from this? And part of the viability looks at what are the other sources of funding and what does that mean for repayment of loans? So, discussing how that is put into legislation, certainly open to that because it's an important piece. This is meant to really fund the gap.
I understand you're looking for that from the towns, but I'm just wondering if it would make sense in terms of the optics of this thing saying, boy, we're so close and this is the remaining piece, whether it's 50% or whatever it is, to mandate that, and as opposed to, just having it part of the application and someone said, yeah, we tried, we couldn't find any money, so we want to rely 100% on the TIF.
Right.
I mean, it sort of demonstrates,
right. Yeah, a demonstration that they've looked for funding, or at least the ability to repay funding, because I think that point that there's money available. It's the ability to repay that money, as well as to leverage money that's out there, creating the match in order to do that.
I mean, we hear about that. We don't require it, but we hear about it in a lot of the subsidized housing projects we fund. They talk about leveraging 17 times the amount of money that's been, with this. So there's that word leverage again, right, Senator Clarkson?
That's your middle name, my dear. I think Keisha has a question, and I do too, which is just to go to that stackability and what we might require in a mini TIF. It strikes me that key to this is a developing partner, a developer. Might we, do we require in this simplified application, because I've looked at it. Are we requiring that we have a partner who's willing to step forward with the municipality in this application?
No, I mean, we've asked for, what I've sent today was the application for the TIF district, which I don't think we probably have time to go through that whole thing, but to show, some of what we ask for. And with the district, you have sort of tiers of, here's what we immediately are looking at doing. But I think that's a reasonable piece that we could look at adding.
It strikes me that particularly with these smaller projects, it makes sense that if they went into this in partnership with a developer that was ready to go and was committed to being ready to go, that would make a big difference. One isn't necessarily going to be sure of all one's financing by the time at the point of application.
Right,
But
of saying that if you were to put in streets and sidewalks and lighting, then we would do our commercial development here.
Yes.
Contingent on the
Yes.
town coming up with putting these pieces in. And I think that's, to another point, we're not just looking at wastewater. I know that's certainly an issue that plagues the state, but it is also other pieces that towns need to bring in those, the development from roads, lighting.
Like
Right.
Middlebury.
Yeah, so there's lots of other
Yes.
examples of
And-
needs.
Keisha had a question, Michael.
Go ahead.
I'm just struck by wanting to know what happened in the post opportunity zone aftermath of, what was successful, what was unsuccessful. I wrote a whole report for the Vermont Community Foundation about how we might try to be successful with that program. And so much of it hinged on technical assistance, coordination, the ability to help a region absorb capital. I'm thinking now about the regions that applied for the Working Communities Challenge grant, some who received it, some who didn't. But the one other thing that came up when it comes to that technical assistance and regional coordination is the unevenness of the regional planning commissions in being able to help provide that technical assistance. And some regional planning folks, I know Fred Kenny was on here before, were right there, so helping the town write their plan for the opportunity zone. Others were kind of like, you're on your own. So, I mean, what responsibility does the state and your team have to help people with that technical assistance, and how can you make sure that goes to the towns who have the least amount of professional staff, or capacity?
So I think, our staff, we have a grants program manager who focuses on the TIF program, and she has been here for about 2.5 years and has done an incredible job in the work that has been done in terms of oversight and monitoring of our TIF districts, providing that technical assistance up front so that when questions come up, we're right there to talk them through it. I think, the expectation is that we would certainly absolutely be there for these communities as well. And that the ability to finance related costs through TIF is important. And whether that related cost is with the Regional Development Corporation or the Regional Planning Commission or an outside group, that communities are looking at that. But that too has to be part of the viability when we're looking at what is the amount you're going to incur. That includes the repayment includes improvement costs and related costs. So if someone comes in and says, well, we're going to do 1.5 million in improvements and we have another $500,000 in related costs, that's not going to pass muster. It's got to be reasonable, and that's part of the reason we have simplified the program to reduce the need to have sort of that long-term, really complicated development conversation. But the technical assistance piece is critical, and that's why we want to keep that related cost piece in there and make sure that the communities who would use this program are supported in being successful. and that taxpayer dollars are protected.
Have we actually talked to any of our regional planning executive directors? I mean, I know Fred was on, as Keisha pointed out, but about what that might look like in terms of additional cost for them or time and energy. I mean, have you worked with them, Megan, on because, you know, I think of towns with no professional managers, no full-time professionals, except maybe a clerk and a treasurer. And I think that this is a key question as we look at this.
Right. Yeah, I was met with the regional planning commissions last year when we were talking about this. Can certainly talk with them this year about coming back and speaking with the committee.
Okay, Megan, we're going to have to wrap up.
Sure.
Can you send me an email with, you can think of other witnesses? I know Senator Clarkson had a couple. I'm going to try and put together a list for next week so we can finish up our testimony, at least if you can, like, I don't know, regional planning commissions or regional development commissions, whether corporations, whether we want to hear representatives of them, of their groups, you know, maybe the League of Cities and Towns. So if you can get me a list and we'll get some invites out.
Sure.
But, and certainly committee members, let me know as well if they have any other witnesses they want to hear from. So again, I'd encourage committee members to read a bunch of the material that's been submitted, and Senator Clarkson, myself, and Nathan are going to stay on to finalize the agenda for next week. But I know this is in there for one morning with the hope of making a decision whether we're going forward with it or not. So.
And can I just add, I don't think I answered your question, Senator Rahm, about opportunity zones. So maybe you could email me. I wasn't trying to avoid it. So if you want to email me that specific question so we can talk about it at the next time, we're here, happy to do that.
Yeah, I think it's an important interface that I think we're not clear on with a lot of what we're talking about.
I agree. Not a lot of what we're talking about on that one.
No,
But-
opportunity zones, and you know, we're
Okay.
going to have additional proposals about opportunity zones that it would be good to.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, Megan. Was there any?
No.
Is there anything else?
No, we're good.
Very
Thank you
much
so
okay.
much for your time.
Good. I want to thank the committee. We'll see you on the floor